What's up, everybody? We back. Okay, so this is part two, and this will be with spoilers. So if you have not seen this movie, I recommend not watching this video. Okay, unless of course you just want to see the spoilers and then go to the movie. That's of course totally fine with me. Now, Io Capitano, I think is an excellent film. I don't think it's perfect, and I will get into some of the critiques I have of it. But overall, I really like this movie. I was super engaged. In fact, the first half in particular really engaged me. I have to say that I loved like the first how it even started. And I'm always big on this. I think that a movie is great the moment it starts, right? If you start watching a film and within the first 5, 10, 15 minutes you're bored out of your mind, that movie is probably not going to improve. I'm a big fan of this. I think that a great story starts early, right? It starts at the very beginning. So if you can't start with a great story, if you can't keep me enthralled in the first minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, how the hell are you going to keep me enthralled throughout the rest of this movie, right? And I thought that right away we know the motivations of the main characters, which I thought was excellent. You'd be surprised at how many films drop the ball on that, especially some of these art housey films where they kind of leave it up to you, like choose your own adventure, and I don't really like that shit. But the point is, we know what motivates the main characters. They want to leave Senegal, and I liked how right away you saw that they were working towards something, and more importantly, I thought that the scene where he's having the main character's having a conversation with his mom and he's trying to broach the idea of like I'm gonna leave, and the mom just sort of snaps and gets angry at him and it's like nope, you're staying here, and you can tell like even her response, and this was great acting on the mom's part, that you could tell the mom has this guilt in her where she feels like she's not doing enough, right? And that's why it's almost like, but she won't admit it, right? It's like, oh, I'm not doing enough to keep my son from thinking outside thoughts of leaving, and life is unfair. There's a certain way you can feel because anger and guilt, and it's a bitterness, if that makes sense. And I thought that she really portrayed that super well without it being so over the top, right? And then he notices that his mom is not receptive to the idea, so he like lies to her. It's like, no, I'm not really leaving. I was just joking. And I was like, that's brilliant. It's brilliant. You know what I'm saying? Like again, an early scene like that in the movie that's well written, well acted, just well done. Right off the bat makes me assured where I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna waste my time watching this. This is gonna be a good movie. So overall, I thought it was very, very strong film, especially the first half. I thought the first half was phenomenal, and it just moved really quickly and really interestingly. They were going from place to place, and it all fit. They're through the desert. All that stuff was crazy. It was dope. The Libyan mafia. Now, I will say that to me, the first half was the strongest. When the movie, when the two of them get separated, at pretty much, I would say like 50, 55 minutes into the movie, that to me is when the movie started to kind of go downhill a little bit for me. Personally, it started to slow down. The stuff with him, with sort of finding this like mentor, father figure, who like teaches him building. It was cool, but I didn't feel like the payoff was like super strong on that. I kind of, it was all right, but and that was a criticism of it's for me because he eventually finds his cousin, but I found that that was the way that he found him was so convenient, and it wasn't that memorable to me. It was almost just like, oh, we need him to come back now, and like, oh, he just happens to be in the city. So I thought that that was way too coincidental and way too easy. Now, adding the fact that the cousin has been shot is good because ultimately, at least the cousin wasn't in perfect health because that would have really, I think, killed the vibe of the film. But the fact that the cousin was shot, at least I was like, oh, okay, all right, that's fine. I mean, it's a little convenient for him to return this way, but there's a new sort of obstacle, the cousin being shot that adds some drama to this. So that was okay. But I would say that this movie to me was very, very strong, and really timely concept. I mean, I had no idea that there was this Libyan sort of refugee slave trade thing going on. I mean, this is the thing that again I talk about, that people don't understand what the Arab Muslim world is up to. They just have no concept of this. And again, I'm not saying this because I hate Arabs or that's the furthest thing from the truth. You know what I mean? I grew up with a lot of them. I got love for them. I've been treated well by some of them. I've also been treated horribly racist by some of them. There are good people everywhere, right? But if we're being honest, let's be honest and call a spade a spade. The truth of the matter is that if you look at the Arab Muslim world, they have been engaging in slavery for a very long time, right? And this is why it's weird to me that people like black folk would swear solidarity with them and not have any idea of what the jihadis are doing who are funded by these Arab Muslim countries who are taking slaves. How do you think that some of these black people are ending up in Gaza to begin with? And in neighborhoods like called Al Abid, and that's literally called basically slave neighborhood, right? They're getting freaking trafficked. I mean, this is the stuff that blows my mind, right? But if I bring that up, I'm Islamophobic. But again, most people don't, most of these black folk who are expressing solidarity with Islamofascism aren't even into black folk. They're just grifting and they're pretending. And that to me is the stuff that blows me away and obviously irks me to the very core. Because if you really cared about black folk, if you really were interested in history and knowing how black people across diaspora think, you would not be celebrating Free Palestine. You just wouldn't be. Okay? Now, I went on a tangent, but I think it's really important to show this because this is something that people don't know and they don't talk about. I actually think this is really funny. I just remembered now why I wanted to pull this up on IMDb. I thought this was hilarious. There was a comment on IMDb where I was like, someone was literally mad. Someone was angry. Let's see here. Misleading information about Libya. I love this comment. I really enjoyed the movie and most of it is accurate. However, the bad rating, this person gave a 1 star. Simply because as a Libyan, they hadn't seen or heard that illegal African migrants are taking over or being used as slavery, right? So they say one thing, right? But then they're like, well, yes, there are illegal smugglers. So it's like, wait. So have you heard about it or have you not heard about it, right? Right? Like, so this is the problem with all this. It doesn't make sense, right? This comes back to this whole tochiRTA thing, right? It's like you're mad at people telling the truth, right? Like you're on a 1-star movie just because of this. Again, this is kind of the nonsense that we're used to. So yes, the government is trying hard to fight it. So it's like, okay, so you are aware that it happens, but you're just playing it off. So I don't quite like that. I think that ultimately people have to be honest about what's really going on in these sort of scenarios and in these settings. So that's one side of it. Now, the movie itself, I will say, is an excellent watch. You get through it. There are a few things that I kind of said, this could have been done better. And I think what I'll do is I'll look at this guy's reviews because he mentioned some things that I thought was kind of interesting. And I don't want to put him necessarily on the spotlight, but I will say this. I thought it was interesting. Some of his comments to me was like, oh, that's respectful. That's kind of what a white person would think, right? And it's interesting how biases come into how you read things. And again, maybe I'm generalizing. Not all white people obviously think like him. How could I say that? But I do think there is sometimes this very liberal, again, this sort of this leaning where it's like, bro, you clearly aren't aware of the world outside of your own world, right? So certain things are not going to ring for you. Let me give you an example of this, right? So let's see here. One of the critiques he said, and I'll play it, is that he basically says that he was like, well, I don't understand why the boys would leave. They seem to have great lives. I was like, what?
Is actually the life we saw them having in Senegal seemed like a good, happy life, a nice community, nice.
What? They were starving. You could tell they were in the bottom of the socioeconomic ladder or close to the bottom. And frankly, this is part of that. This is that woke shit. Senegal sucks. I mean, again, I say that with all due respect, right? Because I'm Nigerian. I know what it's like. So, but this idea that because he saw them dancing in the street with people that their life was great. Their life is not great, man. They're trapped. Okay. I know what that's like. Okay. Or at least I've been in those environments. Luckily, I'm, I was born, I'm a Canadian, so I can leave. And most people don't have the option to leave. That's the problem. But to say that they looked happy and all that shit, and it was like, what? Nice family. Where was the father? The father's not there, right? And you forget that the big part of it is not just the fact that their socioeconomics and environment wasn't great, but the psychological pressure of not being able to fulfill their dreams of being musicians is a massive psychological pressure. And that can happen to anyone, right? Especially if, like, think about it. They're dreaming of a place where you can actually become a full-time artist. There's really only a few places in the world where you can do that in a meaningful way. Let's be real here, right? Whether it be, obviously, number one is probably the United States. Maybe like they've envisioned Italy or parts of Europe, Canada to a certain extent. I mean, people, you have to understand, people in the villages have cell phones. I'm from the village. I've seen this. So of course they can watch things on YouTube, and they see people who look like them who are living life abroad, and they're thinking, damn, like, why am I not there? You have to think about this shit. So for him to be like, oh, I don't see why they would want to leave. Like, what? The socioeconomic aspect aside, the psychological pressure of not being who you want to be and wanting to go to the Western world to become who you really want to be is a huge part. And this is again why I always talk about you have to be happy about living in the Western world, because it's not just socioeconomic. What really draws people to the Western world, aside from that, is the freedom, is the ability to be who you want to be. In most of the world, you're not allowed to be who you want to be. And that's why it's offensive to me when I see people caping for freaking terrorists in the Western world. Right? It's fucking offensive. Anyway.
Family. We certainly root for them, but these are not asylum seekers. They're economic migrants.
I think he's missing the point.
And we definitely have an understanding why they might want to move to have better opportunities,
Right.
especially wanting to get into the music industry. But I think the film falls short in just not addressing the complexities of the difference between an economic migrant and a refugee seeking asylum.
See, to me, disagree entirely. I think it's very clear what their motivations are. And I would say that those lines are very blurred in a lot of times, in a lot of cases. Yes, there's the occasional person that is just coming for, due to war, for example. They're just literally trying to escape to get to somewhere else, and they're not thinking about becoming musicians or whatever. So yes, there are some differences between somebody who's seeking economic sort of prosperity and somebody who's just sort of trying to be an artist, quote unquote, or to his point. But often those lines are in fact blurred. That's the point, and that doesn't make their dream any less valid. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, so I kind of thought that was a not so accurate motivation on his part or critique. Now, there's another part of this that I think he talks about that I think is actually a fair critique, where he mentions that the magical realism
journey. There's just these two instances of magical realism,
Yeah.
and I'm not really sure that they fit in such a serious film.
I have to agree.
That said, they are beautiful.
And
They're
it's true.
really memorable scenes. Overall, I would
So yeah, I agree. I think that there are two instances. If you watch this movie, you know what I'm talking about, where he's sort of carrying the lady, which it almost made it a little. Yeah, it was beautiful, but it almost made the movie a little goofy. That's for a tad second, and I agree with him, and I think this is interesting enough. One of the trickier aspects of art is that sometimes you can add an element to your art, whether it be a song or a film, that individually is beautiful and strong, but actually undermines your entire storyline or your entire art or whatever, and that's a little harder to find out and figure out. There's things that you can tell, oh, this is trash. We're not even adding that. But the stuff that you add that is actually really dope in itself, but doesn't fit really. That's tricky, and that requires a really sharp individual to notice that, and sometimes an editor, of course, to really notice that and say, this actually undermines the seriousness of your narrative. And I agree with the gentleman when he said that. So I definitely think that that's one aspect of the film that I would critique. I don't know if I would have thrown it out, but in general, I thought that even that whole when they go and get blessings from this sort of shaman, it was a little weak, you know. But I can understand it, but it's also a tad kind of. So that's one side of it. Now, the big critique I have for this film, I would say, aside from finding the cousin too soon, and in the circumstances of finding the cousin was so easily resolved, I would say the number one thing was the ending. I thought that the ending was actually pretty weak, and unfortunately, in a way, if he had stuck the ending and stuck that landing, I think I would have said this movie was like a 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. It really would have taken this movie to a whole nother level. Endings are extremely important. And I found that the ending of just, oh, I'm, on the boat and I'm the captain. We're here. We made it. It's like, really? Like, it just ended all of a sudden. And I thought that was pretty weak. So I'll play Matteo's thought on this, because he actually based this somewhat on a real story of a kid who had in fact captained this boat and then ended up arriving at the destination but was arrested for trafficking. And I think that's brilliant. That should have been the ending, because and in fact that's what happened in real life apparently.
He was always pure.
Let's see here.
He was 15. He drove the boat without know how to drive a boat, and he saved the life of 250 people. And when he arrived and he said, I'm the captain, io capitano, he was put in jail as a trafficant of human being. So we live this contradiction in Italy.
So this is the thing. And I was surprised that they didn't put this in the film, because to me, this would have made their argument so strong. And in fact, when I was watching this movie for the first time, I remember thinking to myself, why is this Libyan guy, this Libyan boss or trafficker, why is he so insistent on having this small boy captain this boat? Like, why would he even want that shit? But having this as the ending would have made total sense, because it's like, I've gotten my money, because that boat was rusty and rickety and shit. So he's like, probably like, look, listen, like, I don't care what happens to this boat. That's a loss. And it's a win-win for me, because I've gotten the money to send these people, into the sea. Whatever happens to them, happens to them. And if they do, in fact, get arrested, this boy gets arrested, it can't come back to me. So to me, that's why I thought that ending would have been way better than just, oh, we made it, right? Because it didn't really drive home the fact as to why he was even the captain of the boat. It was a little random. And then also to call that kind of like, I would say the movie centered around this moment, right? Io Capitano, the movie centered around this moment that you don't even give a full payoff to, I thought was pretty weak. So that alone made me say, this is kind of like an 8 out of 10 film, and I wish it was stronger in that regard. But other than that, I think it moved very quickly, and in a good way. I don't think it was slow. I don't think it was too fast either. Someone will say it's too fast. I don't agree with that at all. I think it moved at a good enough pace given the storyline. In fact, there was a part where it slowed down a tad. So if you have seen this film, let me know what you think, and would love to discuss it further. I do think it's quite strong. All right, easy.